So I'm Adam Kedmy. I consider myself a linguist, and I've been given the diagnosis of autism. So they're very much my identity. Uh, by my understanding of it, a linguist is just anyone who cares about how and or why languages does all its things. And that's something that one of my linguistics professors at university taught me. And by that measure, I've been a linguist since I was 7. I've always cared about why people use the language they do to control things and to do things the way they do. And I see autism more from an experiential point of view, and you're going to have to follow me through with that to understand my explanation of how COVID really affects us. I believe that it's just a pattern that our society recognizes in us. We don't recognize the people who are really good at riding bicycles because they don't cause problems, whereas the difference that autistic folks come with cause enough problems that our history started acknowledging they're there to find help. And if you can follow me on the idea that people are just flesh robots, it makes the conversation much easier, because then we can remove the idea of thinking from the idea of doing and look honestly at the things that are getting in the way for autistic folks in and out of the COVID restrictions. My whole life, I've lived trying to solve autistic problems. I wasn't diagnosed till I was 30, and this gave me a lot of freedom to ask for accommodations without them being known as accommodations, especially since in my region of the world, everyone else's perception of me gives me lots of entitlement, being male, white, and tall. So as you'll see through this, and I have asked questions during the presentation, you may have noticed I really believe in dialogue. I think that no communication is all that effective without having two sides, without having an understanding of what's being heard while you understand what's being said. And that comes with dialogue. And I really like how Susan explained building resilience as an attitude, as a bunch of experiences that can help a person, because I think that attitude is the biggest indicator of success in everybody. So with autistic personhood, or an autistic label, or being autistic, however you want to say it, they all mean slightly different things. It's just one pattern of person. It's just one way the robot is built of person, and the way that person interacts with society is how we measure how autistic they are, whether they're many needs autism 3, or few autism 1. And to understand that we have different tools in our body, sight is one of our tools. We can see things around us just by opening our eyes. That's something assumed, but then when there's interruptions in it, because it's so assumed, that becomes a problem. And that's where easy to do becomes very different when you're a different person. Somebody who genuinely couldn't see, easy to cross the street isn't the same as somebody who can see. With autism, we have more hidden differences, and that convolutes the problem. And that's why I'll be using the robot programming and equipment metaphor, because our equipment seems to be different. And so just like my slideshow is different and looks different, it does the same thing, it gets to the same ends, but technically it's different. So unless I make it okay, most people aren't going to interact with it as if it is the same. That's been my attitude my whole life. So that's going to be a big part of my explanation of why things are changing and different, is focusing on that developmental or social strategy to get answers has changed a lot during COVID. I also believe that the idea of autistic folks not being the same culture as the one they grow up in, a lot of the time, that's why we are different. I process information differently. I come to different conclusions because of what I noticed, because of how my thinking has been influenced and has been built over my lifetime. So I might notice, well, in autistic places I can brag, because I will notice what the real problem is when I'm doing respite in a group setting. before my non-autistic coworkers because I'm noticing the same thing that the person who has a problem is noticing. And bridging that divide is the first step in connection. And because I come with all the cultural lenses that the other person has, ability to see, reactionary at a certain point, usually I can borrow their experience more easily than someone who doesn't have the same equipment as them. One of the things I also believe in is that it's developmental disorder. There are some things that I'm still a 3-year-old. I've just had 30 years experience practicing that 3-year-old behavior. When a fire truck goes by outside my apartment, sometimes I'll see the flashing lights through the windows and I'll always hear the sound. And that can cause panic in me, just like I'm a 3-year-old seeing a fire truck for the first time. It's loud, it's bright, it's there to get our attention. It does that really well. So I know that the answer for 3-year-olds of somebody needs to talk me through what's happening, make it positive, validate my experience, and then tell me what to do. It's something I can actually borrow and move on with, where it goes by, I say, yep, that's loud, they're going to help people. All right, back to what I was doing here. And then I can move through that 3-year-old moment. When people don't recognize this, the world can be full of microtransgressions that they can't even see. Where I've been asked in the theme of resilience to just get through it because everybody can, where the sensitivities I'm going through, I'm light sensitive and other sensations can overwhelm me quite easily. They're stopping me to the point of how sound machines used by law enforcement can stop a person with just sound waves. Only I'm going through that in a range that everyone else is more tolerant to. And when someone expects me not to be me, it feels a lot like ableism. It feels like being told that I can't do this unless I change fundamentally how my robot, my person is built, because I see that light. I have to interact with it. And so this creates an odd pattern. A lot of people seem mystified about how autistic folks have friendships. I get this question a lot. How do you make friends? What does friendship look like? And for us, it usually is not the script of know a person from a distance, acquaint yourself, know them as an acquaintance, maybe a coworker, then you're a casual friend, then you're a meaningful friend. That pattern can happen, but it usually happens incidentally because our interaction, how I have small talk here, you have to be really, really permissive to say this is how we do small talk. For us, friendship, most of my best friends, we just started interacting about something we care about. And we both care about it, so we know we can trust each other. And right from the get-go, we're already on the intimate relationship of step 3, where most people, there's this standoffishness, then you earn social value with them. We just jump right into step 3. We have the social value. This person is as much of an expert as they're going to be, and we're going to use that expertise to our advantage in this conversation. And while we work on it, we have these friend moments where maybe something tangential in our life comes in, and that is how we talk about it. That's how we solve problems. Oh, I've been fighting with my mom. We're fighting about this. Do you know anything about that? Now we have that meaningful friend moment. That seems to be where most people put the value on interconnectedness in personal ways. And with COVID, this has been stolen from us. I can't ever incidentally just walk into a professor's office right now because their offices are in their homes. My solution for not knowing how to navigate in the university was to literally just go find who's in charge, learn where their office is, and say, oh, hey, this is where your office is. While I'm here, I had a question. And then I get my questions answered. Because the communication part is where my weakness typically is, that solves it. So with COVID, the changes have happened quite readily. That one of the changes that happened was I got a job as a peer support mentor. And that's what I've been doing for the last 10 months, I believe. And that puts me in contact with adults who generally aren't in contact with that many folks. And my job is to ask them, hey, what's going on with you? Is there anything you're suffering from that I can point you in a direction? And overwhelmingly, it's this different rules. Anyone who was capitalizing on rules can't do that anymore a lot of the time. They've had to readjust. That adjustment is a communication process that, in my opinion, necessitates a dialogue, because I need to be able to ask, okay, what do you intend this service to be for? And then when they say what it is, I will try and stretch it, because usually I'm thinking of a problem so differently than the way they're prepared to say I can address it, that it needs that back and forth. And with that being removed, we're all islands again. We have to start inventing our own new wheels to solve things. And that isolation just removes all of our tools. The social pressures have all changed. If you're used to escaping crowds one way, you have to learn the new rules that you now will escape them doing that way. You have to have your mask on. You have to appear like you're following all the rules, but not following them too well, because then the people who don't want to follow them start weird little fights with us. And it's all that navigation doesn't have a cohort, doesn't have anyone walking us through it, no experts helping us change with the people around us, because the experts just put out the information and the people around us take it up in different timings. So this lack of concise communication has caused the most COVID-related confusion, where one business can be working off of 3 months ago's rules, and then another business saw the rules last week and they changed them all. So now there's 2 sets of rules and no advertising for who's doing what. So one of the things is, like I was saying, we don't have role models. We don't have anyone who does it, because everyone who does it well has somewhere in their explanation of how they do it well is, I'm going to do it the way I know is right, and I'm going to forget everyone who criticizes me until I have time to replan what I'm doing. And we come from a place where we're more reactive. We don't have the ability to put up with criticism as well. So those solutions don't typically work. And we just are left hanging. So we make it up, we have fights. I've seen more predatory practices put on individuals because they're more alone. They have fewer people to talk to as the problem is ramping up. So a landlord who's not that great might start putting pressure on them by saying, you have to do this, you have to do that. They don't have someone to ask, is this reasonable for my landlord to do? And then more than one landlord has kicked people out during COVID, and they have to fight that from this place of isolation. It wasn't going to be easy on a normal day. It's even harder with COVID restrictions limiting who you can talk to, how you can talk to them. So much like the people before me, I don't want to leave it on why everything sucks. So there are some practical tips, and most of these will work most of the time, not just with COVID. Active listening to make sure that the dialogue is in the same place. I've had so many fights throughout my life because I'm talking about real pancakes and the other person's talking about metaphorical pancakes when something gets squashed, and we didn't know about it until we had finished fighting, and we're just like, well, we'll never know. We just had a bad fight about something stupid. So having active listening or validating the subjects of communication all the time really helps. Especially when it comes to what we can and can't do, like in the time of COVID. And over-explaining that idea of talking along. It's a way of giving us the tools, whether we can use them or not. Like, things are always bright for me. If someone in my youth had told me how they know something's too bright for them so that they know how, when it's time to be around not bright, I might have been younger than 28 when I figured out that I have a condition called Irlen syndrome, and wearing sunglasses in any light amounts more than what I'm in currently is necessary. And I would have been able to access that solution because I'd have known how to think of the problem. And in COVID, we have new problems coming up every day. Now we have to wear 2 masks in some regions. Now we have to do this, now we have to do that. But how do you do it? How do you make sure it gets done? Those communication steps, even with yourself in the middle. I intended to wear a mask. I bought the mask. I put it in my house where it's safe. If you miss the step of bring it with you, you're not going to wear the mask. And so we just miss these little steps because we're so busy finding out how to be like the rest of you with the rest of the steps that we lose one. So always having that available without it being patronizing is what I shoot for with the people I help. We can also setting healthy limits. A lot of the time, because I'm coming from a place where I see the world so differently, I don't understand normal limits because they're a different intensity for me than they are for everyone else. And I find this with a lot of the autistic folks I help, especially with kids, where the intensity of two events is exactly the same for them. So they don't understand how crossing the road versus running out onto tarmac is different. Where to the rest of us, we see that the context it's in is important, even if it feels the same to do that in those two different ways. And measuring each choice, most of us don't realize right away that a lot of choices, no matter what we do, won't change the outcome. Do I look at the sunrise every day or not? Well, by the time it's noon, that part of my life isn't as important. So spending an hour to decide this, useless, when it'll either happen or it won't. And that one choice that is a routine part of normal society is most often the choice I'm offering people to help them decide whether to worry about a COVID restriction or not. And the other thing is, with all of these communities being shut down, so I can't just show up to my comic book store, play one of the games they sell with people, and have my incidental friendships. Online communities are a real thing. They have all the parts that I think are necessary. And overall, I look at people like they have many different ages. In the fire truck example, I'm a 3-year-old for a moment. That doesn't mean I'm not 25 plus, which is the maximum age on my scale, for the rest of the things around that moment. But in that moment, I am still partly 3-year-old, and I have to deal with the weakest part of my experience at that moment. So those are the ways that I typically will solve the problems like this. Thank you.